War may not ever change, but apparently neither do brotherly squabbles and changing your entire persona because you found the clothing of an American founding father. Okay, maybe that last part changes. I'm Mark from Digital Dissection. I make Fallout lore videos, and today I'll be your guide to facts about John McDonough, also known as John Hancock, and how he changed the landscape of Fallout 4 forever. John Hancock was actually born John McDonough, and before becoming a necrotic posthuman, he grew up living just outside Diamond City in a shack with his family. His parents were named Martha and Patrick, and he had an older brother. Hancock doesn't exactly speak about his brother with much affinity, as he had this to say about him.
Guy was the standard big brother. Entitled, punchy, liked to shove rotten potatoes down my shirt and slap my back.
Even with an older brother that might border on being a bully, Hancock admits it wasn't an entirely awful childhood. At an unknown point, both of the McDonough parents, however, would pass away, and the brothers would end up estranged by the 2280s. Why the brothers McDonough began to have a falling out involved Diamond City, a post-war settlement built within what was once known as Fenway Park. The McDonoughs had lived nearby growing up, but by 2282, the elder son was embedded within its local government in a race to become its mayor. John and his older brother began to be at odds with one another, as his siblings' bid to hold public office rallied behind a plan to vacate all ghouls from the population. The inhumane treatment and eventual public opinion change of ghouls within the city eroded the relationship between the McDonough brothers.
But then he decides he's gonna try and get elected with his anti-ghoul crusade. Mankind for McDonough. Before you know it, you got families with kids lining up to drag folks they call neighbor out of their homes and throw them to the ruins.
By 2282, hatred for ghouls and growing fear amongst them was normal, prompting John to confront his brother. John's brother officially won the mayor race, and on the backs of growing violence against mutated individuals and the Diamond City ghoul population. Mayor McDonough had successfully positioned himself amongst the upper class of Diamond City, and rode this wave to public office. John decided to face his older brother immediately after the inauguration.
I remember storming into his office above the stands after the inauguration speech. He was just standing there, staring out the window, watching as the city turned on the ghouls. He didn't even look at me. Just said, "I did it, John. It's finally mine."
It was clear that differences between the brothers was no longer just that of opinion, but a complete loss of humanity for the elder McDonough brother, signaling an impasse between the two. John McDonough officially leaves Diamond City in the wake of seeing his brother become unrecognizable before his eyes, and sets out to begin rallying the mutated refugees who now have nowhere to go. He'd find many former neighbors now heading into Boston's ruins, and gather them together to eventually resettle to a town named Goodneighbor. Before the Great War, Goodneighbor was actually named Scully Square until about the 1960s, later becoming called the Government Center. The reason for this facelift was due to the area becoming a red light district of sorts in Boston, with portions representing a shantytown. By 2287, it faces an oddly similar identity as it did almost 300 years before, as it represents a locale for society's outcasts, such as criminals, misfits, and ghouls. Oddly enough, Goodneighbor's creation was caused in 2240 due to criminals being exiled from Diamond City, and Mayor McDonough's policies now mirror a similar exodus almost 50 years later. Despite John's best efforts, Goodneighbor brought along its own challenges. John McDonough had tried his hardest to salvage the difficult times he was seemingly thrust into. While noble in many ways, his attempts to save mutants and ghouls from the harsh wasteland didn't have a fully realized solution in Goodneighbor. The settlement was largely comprised of slums, and it was overseen by a ruthless mob boss named Vic. John knew of Goodneighbor based on his own demons, as it had been a constant source of addictive chems, and the rough lifestyle of the town wasn't one that the displaced families of Diamond City were prepared to deal with. Slowly, these refugees disappeared from Goodneighbor one by one, despite John's attempts to feed them and keep an eye on their status. Eventually, many of the Diamond City mutants were either lost to the violence of Boston's ruins, or went further into its hellish landscape, never to be seen again. Overcome with guilt, John's exile to Goodneighbor became a far more permanent concept, as he felt a tremendous sense of failure and entered a pit of self-destruction. John's own journey to leave Diamond City may have been based on strong values, but the loss of those he desperately tried to save sent him into a chem-addicted existence as he tried to make sense of the events unfolding before him. This led to him going on a bender with the commonly available chem jet, but he'd continued to experiment until finding a treatment for radiation that only had one known dose, and a high that he supposedly would never forget. It was this experimental drug that actually turned John into a ghoul. And while it's not fully known exactly what it was, the singular dose of it was enough to fully initiate ghoulification and transform him into a necrotic post-human. The younger McDonough was plagued by his own failures for years, but fully realized his shortcomings when a drifter he had met was murdered by Vic's goons. And helpless to do anything about it, further slipped into his despair. With the violence he witnessed and his own decisions haunting him at every turn, John would finally go on a bender so bad that he would black out, which is an achievement given how much chems ghouls can actually withstand. It's not often that vices can lead to positive outcomes, but one evening of bad decisions caused John to finally gain consciousness in a very odd place, the old State House of Boston. It was here that many ideas of the American Revolutionary War were born, including the events leading to the Boston Massacre. But now, it represented the new ideals for what Goodneighbor could be. John discovered a set of clothes that once belonged to the American founding father and revolutionary John Hancock, and upon reading of his exploits and that of the 1770s era, took both the clothes and the name John Hancock for himself. Seeing inspiration from the militias that constituted the American Revolutionary era, Hancock began to see a path forward for a new Goodneighbor, one that required the removal of Vic and his cronies. While it didn't fully stop his chem addiction from continuing, he would go sober for a time to enact his plans. Ultimately, Vic had to be stopped, and Hancock believed he could form a militia comprised of Goodneighbor's drifters to swing the balance of power and give the community back to its people, even if they were imperfect themselves. He'd enlist the help of Cleo, a friendly assaultron vendor, and with her weapons, trained his militia in private until a day that they were prepared to fight back. An evening soon came where Vic's men returned, but this time, Hancock and his militia were waiting for them.
So, the night of, we all got loaded, let Vic's boys get good and hammered, and burst from the windows and rooftops where we'd been hiding. They never even saw it coming. We didn't have to fire a shot. We didn't have to. Once we'd mopped up, we strolled right into Vic's quarters in the State House, wrapped a rope around his neck, and threw him off the balcony.
In that moment, Hancock officially became the mayor of Goodneighbor.
And there I am, gun in hand, draped in Hancock's duds, looking at all the people of Goodneighbor assembled below. I had to say something. That first time I said them, they didn't even feel like my words. Of the people, for the people, was my inaugural address. Became Mayor Hancock of Goodneighbor that day. And from then on, I vowed I'd never stand by and watch. Ever again.
To some, Hancock may seem like equal parts hero and villain, as his sense of moral justice can seem harsh and dramatic. After all, he will end the lives of those close to him given a good reason, and is willing to wipe out rival factions in Goodneighbor with his own hands or with mercenaries. On the other hand, though, he's a relatively humble character, feeling at times like he's potentially too much like his brother, but equally displaying remorse and even shame after discovering that Mayor McDonough was actually a synth the majority of their adult lives. Despite his usage of chems, he's managed to create a strong community around Goodneighbor, and his unorthodox level of leadership inspires the community to rely on him for guidance and direction. Of Fallout's many companions, Hancock represents managing to balance what previous titles perhaps didn't do very well, which was heavily skewing a character's purpose too far in a good or bad direction. Hancock manages to encapsulate both sides, and one might argue that a rebellious soul would seemingly have to. Hancock, however, wins over many Fallout fans because his style of values matched the landscape of Goodneighbor itself, an environment that isn't necessarily a visual triumph, but a community built on varied levels of freedom that occasionally require correction. Somehow in the fray, Hancock manages to make it work, and he definitely seems like the right person for the job. And with that, we thank you for joining us as we explored 9 facts about Fallout's John Hancock. Are there any facts about the New World Rebel we missed? Let us know in the comments. And for more content just like this video, check out our Fallout Stories playlist linked here, where you can find more weekly Fallout content. And until next time, pop culture nerds, keep on dissecting. This is Mark signing off.